Washington Wizards fans, I did not forget about you. I know this has been a highly requested video on the channel, and I'm finally getting to it. I have been super busy last month or so, covering a ton of stuff for the NBA draft. I started a new job, and I've got a lot of stuff going on. So here I am, finally getting to this Washington Wizards offseason preview. Thank you so much for sticking around on the channel. I do really value your guys' comments and what videos you want to see. So hopefully it's not too late. Hopefully you guys do enjoy today's video. If you do, make sure to leave a like and also subscribe to the channel. That would be greatly appreciated if you could do those things for me. And now let's go ahead and jump into this Wizards offseason preview. I'm really excited to cover this team in today's video. And when we look at Washington, we're going to cover them the same way we have the other teams. And the video preview here, you can see we're following the same type of style. 2021-2022 season. Look back at this past year. What did we learn about this team? Where do they need to improve? And what were some bright spots from this team as well? Then we'll look at some key decisions to make and a little bit of an emphasis here on maybe a specific player, because not only does the Wizards front office have some decisions to make, but also a key Washington player does as well. Then 2022 NBA draft. I know a lot of my viewers here love the NBA draft, and I feel like I cover it with a lot of intensity. So we're going to look at who Washington can maybe consider on the night of the draft, and specifically in round one. I think that's really the one that a lot of people are looking forward to. 2022 NBA free agency. We'll talk about the free agent targets that make a lot of sense for them given their cap space situation. I actually have a really fun idea cooked up in this one as well, but also some safer options as well here for Washington. And then you look at next season. What should the goals be? And then what are the actual realistic expectations? Of course, those two things probably are not going to be the same, but it's always good to have lofty goals. That should be every single team's onus going into the season, is having lofty expectations, lofty goals. Whether they get there or not, that's for me and you to judge. So we're going to look at that by the end of today's video. Again, if you do enjoy, please leave a like. And let's go ahead and move forward here into the season that just transpired, the 2021-2022 campaign. And the Wizards finished 35-47, which was 12th in the Eastern Conference, a few games back of the New York Knicks, who finished 11th. And a lot went wrong this year for Washington, specifically when you look at the Spencer Dinwiddie signing. That clearly just did not age well. And then, of course, Bradley Beal goes down with a serious wrist injury, has season-ending surgery. And my key takeaway from that was, when there's not a Bradley Beal on the floor for Washington, the Wizards aren't that good. I don't think that's really expert analysis. I just think that's pretty common basic knowledge. Without their best player, they're not going to be that great of a team. But what I do think is, watch for Beal and Porzingis together next year. I think those two players do complement each other very well. And I think Porzingis actually felt pretty comfortable in Washington. As a person who's watched him very closely for an extended period of time, I think Porzingis really started to look like himself a little bit more toward the end of the season. If he can stay healthy, and again, that's a huge if, Washington has a sneaky good acquisition in that deal. I really, really love it from their perspective, giving up two bad contracts in Bertans and Dinwiddie for Porzingis and a second-round pick. Now, you could say Porzingis' contract isn't that great either. There's some truth to that, but at the end of the day, Porzingis was the best player in that deal, and they also got a second-round selection with him. So, seems like a pretty good move for me. And then another key takeaway here, for the love of forwards. They have so many forwards there right now in Washington, a ton of good ones. Maybe there's some flexibility that they could play around with on their roster, maybe make a couple of moves to really reshape what this thing looks like. But ultimately, having a ton of forward depth is not a bad thing, specifically when you already have a really good guard in Bradley Beal, and you also brought in Kristaps Porzingis, who we'll see if he plays the 4 or 5 position most next season. And then the bright spots. Again, you look at Porzingis here, really good numbers, 22, 9, and 3 assists, which is really high for him. That's actually the highest he's had in a stretch in his career. Of course, very limited sample size, only about 17 games for Washington. But he shot 47.5% from the field in his time there, 37% from 3 nearly, and 87% from the line. We're looking at elite shooting numbers there. Very good shooting splits in a short time period. Kyle Kuzma played very well this season as well. Really great reclamation project. Of course, we know Kuzma just did not fit next to AD and LeBron super well. But I think Kuzma ultimately at this point has found himself. Very good rebounder, really improved as a defender as well. And I think is now in a position after posting a career high in assists this season as well to really have upped his stock and to actually be looked at as a key player on this Wizards team. Denny Avdia, a player who I think is going to grow even more. I really liked him coming out of the draft in the 2020 NBA draft. He improved immensely on the defensive side of the ball from his rookie to sophomore season in the NBA. I think he's still got more in store for him. And then Rui Hachimura only played 42 games, so very shortened sample size again for him. And this Wizards team just was beat up with injuries. But I think Hachimura, even though his points per game went down, coming back from that injury, his efficiency was fairly good. And again, I think when you look at the forward spot, we've got 4 forwards right there in Porzingis, Kuzma, Avdia, and Hachimura. Haven't even mentioned Kispert yet, who had a solid rookie season. Not spectacular, but definitely solid. So I think Washington is in a pretty good spot with those guys once Bradley Beal is back healthy. Now as we move on to some of those key decisions, and we're going to start with that key decision Bradley Beal has to make himself, and it's a big one. He has a $37 million player option that he could decide to opt into. The day I'm recording this, there's been rumors that maybe he will actually sign that 5-year, $250 million Supermax extension with the Washington Wizards. And for Washington, it feels like something you have to do, but at the same time, I would be a little bit weary of that. You're looking at giving Bradley Beal $50 million a year, roughly. And yes, Bradley Beal is a phenomenal player. Yes, he's Washington's best player. But at the end of the day, how far is Bradley Beal going to get you? And I think that's something that, if this was a little bit more of a progressive front office, progressive ownership in terms of roster building, maybe they would be aggressive seeking out a Bradley Beal trade. However, just given the MO of that front office and kind of the current situation for Washington basketball, I don't know if they feel like they can actually afford to do that. So Beal probably will be back next year. He does have a 15% trade kicker, so he would get a little bit of a bonus as well if he does get traded. And then you also look at Beal, he has an advance on his contract of nearly 50%. So he'll get about half of his money up front the moment he basically picks up that player option. So there's a lot to watch for in terms of Bradley Beal in the coming future. Thomas Bryant, only 24 years old. It feels like he's been in the league forever. Of course, came in really, really young. I think with Thomas Bryant here, he's a solid center to watch for. He's unrestricted in free agency, so there's going to be some bidders for him for sure. Watch for teams like Charlotte and a few others as well to maybe make a run at Thomas Bryant. I could see the Mavericks expressing interest as well. Then the point guard position. This has really been the biggest issue in Washington in recent memory, and it makes sense as to why. Over a decade ago, they drafted John Wall first overall out of Kentucky, and that was their franchise guy, right? And then once John Wall goes down with that injury, specifically to his Achilles, it does change the entire culture of your organization, and it changes your roster integrity and your roster structure, because you went from relying on a guy to no longer having him. They tried Russell Westbrook. They ultimately moved him, tried bringing in Spencer Dinwiddie, and what I thought was a decent signing. Just didn't pan out well, though, there in Washington. Now they're left with their, questions at that point guard spot. They also tried making a trade for Aaron Holiday. None of those moves panned out. That's really going to be the biggest question moving forward. And then is there a consolidation move here? Or are they going to look at the center position, either in free agency or in the NBA draft, trying to find their true 5? Because right now it's kind of questionable. I know that a lot of people really like Daniel Gafford. I think Daniel Gafford's a good player as well. But my question here is, can he be a starting center on a good playoff team in the Eastern Conference? Because the East has gotten way better. There's a lot of really good big men out there in Joel Embiid. You look at Bam Adebayo, for example. The East is loaded with talent. So is Daniel Gafford good enough to get you into the Eastern Conference playoffs? I don't know. That's really the question you have to ask yourself. Or is Porzingis going to play the 5? Because if Porzingis plays the 5, maybe I can sell myself on that then. But otherwise, you have to consider the 5 position as a little bit of a question mark, at least right now. Moving into the 2022 NBA draft, well, let's look at their assets. They have their own first-round pick this year, which is number 10 overall. And then they also have the Dallas Mavericks second-round selection from the Kristaps Porzingis deal. They do not have their own second round pick this year. So those are the two assets they head into this next draft with. And I think there's definitely some good opportunities here. We're going to focus on the first round specifically. That Mavs pick is rather late in the draft. And for me, here's some draft targets. You look at Dyson Daniels from G League Ignite, a player who I'm not necessarily in love with, but I could see the allure to a lot of people. You know, he's a bigger guard, pretty good playmaking capabilities, especially for others. As a passer, he's a very consistent, solid defender. And I think the fit here into Washington is natural. When you have a player like Kuzma already on the roster, you have Kristaps, you have Hachimura, you've got Kispert, who's a shooter, you've got Avdia, who can do some stuff with the ball and without the ball. You've got Bradley Beal, who's your main offensive scorer. You don't need Dyson Daniels to be an elite shooter at this point. You don't need him to be a great ball handler yet at this point. He can be kind of a complementary offensive fit who brings defensive versatility on the other side of the ball. And I think that's going to be very important for Washington if they want to get to where they want to go. Adding some more length, size, and defensive flexibility is going to be huge there. I haven't even mentioned Kentavious Caldwell-Pope yet as well. If he's still there in Washington, you could have a nice collection of defensive pieces to go around your two offensive stars in Porzingis and Beal. And Porzingis on the defensive end holds his own as a pretty solid rim protector with nearly 2 blocks a game. Then Johnny Davis out of Wisconsin. If he falls to 10, I think this is another great pickup. A player who his stock has fallen just a little bit because of how his season ended at Wisconsin. The sophomore guard obviously just did not play well in their final tourney game, but ultimately he put on some really great film all year long. He's more than deserving of a lottery selection. I would be kind of surprised, honestly, if he is there at 10 for Washington. But if he is, I don't think they should make a mistake and pass on him. He's a very nice pickup for a team. Can kind of play as a combo guard. Probably isn't the most natural fit next to Bradley Beal. But again, it's talent, and I think Washington should prioritize talent. Malachi Branham, probably not as realistic of a target there. But I do think, maybe if Daniels and Johnny Davis off the board, Washington could maybe look at a trade down scenario and then bring in a Malachi Branham. They could also consider a Ty Washington, who is falling down a little bit. Maybe Ousmane Dieng as well from the New Zealand Breakers. I wouldn't completely take him off your radar if you're a Wizards fan. And then at the center position, I talked about my question marks. I do think there are some concerns. Now, Wizards fans probably are going to disagree with me and believe in Gafford. And I don't blame you for that. Gafford is a solid center. But I think Mark Williams, who's one of the biggest risers throughout this draft process, he's legit. At 7'2", really great control around the rim. He's someone who's got great concentration and is very, very good on the defensive side of the ball as well. Great rim protector. Again, a 7'2" height, 9'9" standing reach. He's got really long arms and really good size for the position, which you really can't say that enough. When you look at a player like Porzingis at 7'3", if you're playing him at the power forward and Mark Williams at center at 7'2", those two guys could give you legitimate rim protection to cause a lot of havoc for teams in the Eastern Conference who like to finish around the rim. If you're able to eliminate that, think about the Giannis Antetokounmpos, the Jimmy Butlers of the world. Again, I bring up Joel Embiid. A lot of teams in the East really like to work inside out, and if you can take away some of their greatest strengths with a Mark Williams selection, it does make a lot of sense. Walker Kessler probably would have to come through a trade down scenario again. Not sure if I love that for Washington, but Mark Williams, I wouldn't completely rule it out at this point. Then we look at 2022 NBA free agency, and their projected practical cap space is a negative $49 million. And then you might be looking at me and saying, well, how do they spend any money if they're $49 million over the salary cap? And there's definitely options. They are $27 million below the luxury tax, which is huge because ultimately I can guarantee Washington will not go into the luxury tax. They're just not going to do that with this roster. But they couldn't use the non-taxpayer mid-level exception of roughly around $10.5 million. They do have 11 players under contract moving into this offseason. So with that $27 million, they only need to fill 4 roster spots. Very possible we see them spend this non-taxpayer mid-level exception aggressively. And some of the options for that, you could look at Tyus Jones from the Memphis Grizzlies, who some people are speculating he might get more than that. I think if he does, that would be a disaster. But at $10.5 million, he's kind of that prototypical guard you'd be looking for next to a Bradley Beal, because he's going to be aggressive defensively. He gets in the passing lanes. He's consistently near the tops in the NBA when it comes to deflected passes, which I know doesn't sound super important, but it is. And then you also look at his capability when John Morant was out this past year. He's part of the reason why Memphis was so good without John Morant. Now, I think part of that was a little not realistic and not something that I think would be duplicated going into next year. But at the end of the day, he performed. He's going to get a nice new contract, and Washington wouldn't be a bad spot, especially if they do draft Dyson Daniels. It gives you a combination of guards, one who's a little bit smaller, one who's a little bit bigger, and both of them I think could play meaningful minutes for Washington. Ricky Rubio, another guy that I like to highlight in a lot of these. Again, I think Ricky Rubio is a really good find for a lot of teams. He is coming off of an ACL injury, so that does put some things into question what his market's going to look like. But he was having such a great year for Cleveland that I would still love this for Washington. Or they could go another route and split the mid-level exception for guys like DeLon Wright and Elfrid Payton. Two defensive-minded guards. You try and build this roster out, and maybe if they did go center, this would be the best way of building your team because you bring in guard depth. Elfrid Payton, clearly not a good playoff player, but in order for you to be shown as a bad playoff player, it means you have to make the playoffs, and I think Washington's goal should be to make the postseason. And Elfrid Payton is a reliable guard in the regular season. We didn't get to see him a ton this past year for Phoenix. You could probably get him relatively close to the minimum. And I do think it would be a pretty good signing. DeLon Wright was okay this year as well. Again, those two guys, there's a reason they're splitting the mid-level here. It's not like this is crazy signings, but they are just nice depth pickups that could help this team get a little bit further next season. And then the one I love here, this is the idea that I have that I think maybe a little crazy, maybe a little over the top, but I think it's one of the more realistic outcomes if Colin Sexton were to leave Cleveland. Colin Sexton would sign with the Washington Wizards via sign and trade, and then returning back to Cleveland, a team that Darius Garland really took over as the main guard going forward. He is the guy. They need wings. So you send back Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who I know it hurts to lose. He played fairly well this past year for Washington, but you're looking at yourself and saying, we're getting a younger player who's better in Colin Sexton. So we're going to be fine with giving up KCP. And unfortunately, they also have to give up Corey Kispert in this, who was a former top 15 pick of Washington. Probably would like to keep him. But again, you have a variety of wing players already. Losing Kispert and KCP for Sexton is something that I think Washington would strongly consider to find a point guard. Now, I know Sexton kind of plays more as a combo guard. It's not a true point guard, but I still think it could work here in Washington. He's young. He's coming off of an injury, I know, but for the most part, he's going to be rested, and I think his body's going to be well recovered by the time he would start playing games in Washington. I think this is an intriguing option for the Wizards that if Sexton, again, does leave Cleveland, this is one of the more sensible landing spots in a deal like this. Then we look at next season, and the goal here for Washington, the Wizards want to make the playoffs. That needs to be the desperation, the goal, and that's really, really tough to do now in the Eastern Conference, specifically when you look at how good some of these up-and-coming teams are. You look at the Atlanta Hawks, who've gotten way better in recent memory. You look at teams like the Charlotte Hornets, who are knocking on the doorstep. You've got the Cleveland Cavaliers knocking on the doorstep. You've got a whole bunch of good young teams. The Nets will probably be better again next year. The Celtics aren't going anywhere. Good luck saying goodbye to Miami. Good luck saying goodbye to Milwaukee. There's a lot of really good teams in the East right now. So it's going to be tough. The realistic expectation here is make the play-in. Be a top 10 team in the Eastern Conference. And then you never know what can happen. You'll get on a little bit of a hot streak at the end of the season. You play well in the play-in games, and all of a sudden you're in the playoffs. My actual expectations for specific players here, I think Porzingis could average around 25 points a game, 10 rebounds a night, and 2 blocks a game if they play him at center. Now, if they play him at power forward, probably closer to 22, 8, and 1.5. But again, those are good numbers. And I think Porzingis next to Beal is a pretty good fit, honestly. Kuzma, 15 points a game for him, so a little bit down from this past year, but that's just because Bradley Beal will be back. 7 rebounds a game, 3 assists a game. I see another very good season from Kuz, and I think Avdija is going to take another jump forward. If you have all of this happen and you maybe bring in a Sexton and Beal comes back healthy next year, this team could be pretty good. And I think Washington Could be a fun team to watch, not only on NBA League Pass, but if you're a Wizards fan or you're in market watching this team consistently, I think they're going to be a pretty enjoyable team to watch. Again, I think it's really important to have a good team on the floor and just a good product. And I think Washington, they are building in that direction. I think Wes Unseld Jr. was the right hire as a head coach. I like their front office. I think they're making a lot of smart decisions. I think that they just need a couple bounces to go their way. Of course, if the lottery would have treated them well this year, that definitely could have helped. But ultimately, I think they're in a good spot. And I think Washington is a fun team to watch for. We'll see what they do on draft night. Wizards fans, if you did enjoy today's video, make sure to leave a like. Also, subscribe to the channel if you are new and want more of this NBA content. I do recommend checking out one of my NBA mock drafts on the channel as well to see who I have your Wizards taking. If you guys have any other fun video ideas, make sure to comment them at me right now. Go check us out on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Links are in the bios to that. Hopefully you guys did enjoy. If you did, leave a like, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.